We're live. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Welcome to the first ever Neil cast. I think that's fair to say. You've heard of the Manning cast, you've heard of other alternate casts of things. This is the Neil cast. Looks like we've got a good group in here already. My name is Neil Paine.
Definitely.
I'm joined by Neil Greenberg of Fancy Stats. Hey, how's it going, Neil?
It's going great. Opening day. It's
Yes.
exciting to be able to do a the first ever Neocast.
I know it's a what better occasion than opening day? Not opening night. That was last night. That was a little fun. I don't know your take on this because I kind of hate like I want to be able to just say like opening day. I feel like that's like a baseball thing specifically, and just like that be the first games on that. I don't like this opening night business. I feel like that's more of an NFL thing.
Yeah, and also I don't know if it was the best experience on Netflix last night for opening night, opening introduction, and then opening midnight almost. I mean, it just seemed to like carry on. But I'm with you. Opening day, everybody starts on opening day. Everybody, you're there's too many games to watch.
Right?
I remember back, obviously when I was a kid, there's really only two games that I was able to watch, and usually it was just one for opening day to kick it all off. So I'm with you. Just have a day to do it, and let's get this started.
Yeah, and it makes me think of just last week, like everybody loves and says the best sports day of the year. And I think that's probably true, is the Thursday opening day of the proper round of 64 in the men's NCAA tournament. And that's just an event. I mean, it's like, hey, it's noon. We're going to settle in. We're going to watch like 12 plus consecutive hours of basketball. And it's going to be something that you can kind of just like plan your day or your week around. This like staggered opening, I understand why they did it. The Netflix pull of things is very strong, and even today, I mean, there's only 11 games, so we're going to have 22 teams, but 8 teams are not in action today. And it just feels like, there will be days during the season in which like literally every team is in action. And it does feel like that event. And it seems like you should have one of those days be today.
Yeah, I mean, you want to get as much. Look, baseball is a slog, right? I mean, you have 162 games. It's a very long season. There's only a couple of touch points where you can really get the public galvanized around your sport. Obviously, opening day is one of them. So make the most of it. It's kind of like NBA on Christmas Day. Opening day for baseball. It should just be wall to wall baseball. Like you should be able to get up and watch baseball and fall asleep to baseball and just have it, a national holiday of baseball.
Totally. And I remember you mentioned sort of like memories of opening days growing up. I remember very distinctly, it must have been maybe like, it would have been mid to late 90s, like maybe 97, 98. Just, I was sick home from school that day. I don't know whether I like pulled a little bit of a maybe fast and loose definition of being sick on purpose for this, but I just remember being at home and kind of one of the only times where I just like watched all day like ESPN coverage of Major League Baseball, and this was like peak. I'm sounding like a like an old person here, but really in those '90s days when you had the Baseball Tonight theme song and the graphics and all that, and like Ken Griffey Jr. was playing in his peak with the Mariners, and it just was like, man, that is a special memory. So hopefully, as much as we're like, oh, there's things that we would do differently about today, hopefully people will have their own memories of this coming up off of today. And we've got some good games coming up. If we want to kind of, at first, even right now, I've got NBC on, and we've got the Pirates and the Mets to kind of kick things off. And I think that's a really interesting matchup to start the season, the proper opening day part of the season with. What do you think about this season overall? Just like big picture, zooming out, and what are the things that you're thinking about and have your eye on for the year ahead?
Obviously, it's got to start with the Los Angeles Dodgers spending just a ton of money. Um, Consensus number one team in baseball to varying degrees. But, the Dodgers, in my opinion, have kind of exploring the new money ball and like literally money ball in that it's not necessarily getting the an edge in terms of performance in one particular stat, like we saw the Oakland A's do with on base percentage. It's just risk mitigation. I mean, they have so many stars that it's okay if one of them doesn't perform well or if one of them gets injured or, it just seems like their version of Moneyball is just to eliminate as much risk, in-season risk as possible and be a contender literally for years to come. I mean, that seems to be their game plan. So I'm curious to see how it works. I mean, we've seen big money teams, most notably the Mets, spending a lot of money, it not really translating as well as perhaps anyone would hope. But the Dodgers are the team to beat this year. I don't think anyone is really saying otherwise unless they want to be just contrarian for contrarian's sake. I mean, we can certainly talk about dark horses and other contenders, but they are the number one contender, I think, in a lot of people's minds. And I'm very curious to see how getting so many superstars really does limit their risk, not just for this season, but they're looking big picture, 5-year window, 7-year window to be perennial contenders.
Yeah, and I wrote a thing last year where I was kind of, and I was far from the first person to think of this concept, but it really interests me, and it's something I think to watch with the Dodgers this season is this idea of them being like the first NBA style kind of super team in baseball, where the regular season is, like you said, it's very long. It's something where if you have the means to do it, you have the talent and the depth. And they went through a situation last year where, like, I think their injured list rotation would have been like the 15th best rotation in baseball. And
Yeah.
then the rotation that was active would have been like the 19th best in baseball. So they had literally like two of the 20 best rotations on one team. And that I think was indicative of like what depth can get you, what all that money can get you is you pace yourself throughout the season. Maybe you don't go like I ran some numbers where it appears based on the forecast that they do have, like, if they play to their potential, they have a magical year where everything goes right. They could challenge that 116 win record by the Mariners in 2001 and the Cubs from far longer ago than that, or even like a Yankee 98 Yankees type of season with anytime you're in that mid 110s neighborhood for wins, you've done something special. They could do that. But if you looked at them last year, they really sort of didn't give any indications that they had that level if all you watched was the regular season. But if you knew how good they were and how they were kind of planning and pacing themselves and setting things up for the postseason, then when they got to the postseason, they just kind of mowed a lot of people down, especially the Brewers, which, that was one where I thought the Brewers maybe had a chance in that series. They did not. And really, the Blue Jays could have beaten them in the World Series. That's important to remember as we sort of, I think that'll be a theme to talk about as we talk about the Dodgers' dominance throughout this season is like they could easily have lost that game. Like if Miguel Rojas does not hit that home run late in that game 7, they lose. And we talk about what a great upset it was and how money can't buy championships. But then because they end up going on to win, we talk about how they're ruining baseball and they're buying all these championships. But that being said, they clearly had a plan and they went in to kind of see the big picture, as you said, rather than kind of just going completely all out to try to set wins records when it doesn't really matter. And that really reminds me of a lot of NBA teams in the past 20 years where you saw teams like every so often there will be a team like an OKC, in the past few years, or that Steph Curry Warriors team in 2016 that just is like, we're going for it, man. We want to be part of something even that transcends the normal boundaries of what greatness means in a season. Sometimes that can backfire. The 2016 Warriors are a great example of that as well. But since we're all about maximizing championships now, it does seem like that sense of like we're not going to show what we've really got until the games really truly matter, and we're going to pace ourselves. That mindset, it I don't think it existed as much or maybe at all in baseball, which was traditionally a sport that was very resistant to uh planning. Like you could try to do your best, but ultimately there's a lot of randomness and a lot of chaotic elements and unpredictability, so you do the best you can with what you've got. But some at a certain point when you reach a certain level of talent, that maybe doesn't matter anymore, and we've seen NBA teams do that for a long time, but maybe no baseball teams until the Dodgers.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's kind of the new frontier of Moneyball, right? It's really is limiting the risk over a long period of time. As you said, they're not. Yes, they're absolutely going to contend, and they're very happy doing that. But they want dynasty potential, right? They want to make a run at this thing for a long, long time. Um, and we've seen what really great pitching staffs, great hitting lineups can do, right? I mean, the Atlanta Braves, when they had Tom Glavine and Smoltz and some guy named Maddox who was pretty good. They didn't
Pretty
lose
good.
series, right? Like it was very difficult to to win series against the Braves. And I really do think that's a key component of baseball is if you win series, right? 2 out of 3 games, 3 out of 4 games, you're gonna have a terrific season. And it was very difficult to beat them in a series. And I think that that's kind of the Dodgers are making it very difficult to beat them, even if something goes wrong. They lose, Otani, let's say. They have still uh all stars upon all stars that can help pick up a sack. Maybe they're not a 116 win team. Maybe they're a 95 win team, right? And that's still good enough to get them deep. So there aren't many contenders I don't think that we can look at right now that can kind of dethrone them, at least on paper. But it'll be interesting to see. And in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking the Mets spend money too, and they're not even close to being in that same conversation with the Dodgers. So, it's not necessarily how much you spend; it's who you're spending it on, and how it all works together. I mean, it really is it is a complicated formula.
Yeah, and, speaking of the Mets, they, we're about to watch them play, and they're trying something, a little bit different in terms of just the personnel, like, shaking things up from the past few years where they only made the playoffs once in the past 3 years despite this crazy amount of money that they've, spent on these teams. So we'll see how they do it. It feels like every year on paper they're right there in that mix. And I was going to have us pivot to talk about like, okay, if the Dodgers don't win, who will win? I've seen a lot, and I did my buddy Andrew Steele. He did a little roundup of a bunch of people on Substack to talk about their favorites to their picks to win different things. And I think we all had contrarian brain and maybe just like didn't want to go for the Dodgers for the third straight season because more of us said the Mariners than the Dodgers. Now, do I really think that the Mariners have a greater chance than the Dodgers? Not really. I think sometimes you put down those picks for fun as much as anything. But if you look at the consensus of the different kind of forecasts and models out there, it does seem like the Mariners, who came within a game of going to the World Series last year, and some of that was driven by a particular magical kind of quality to the performances that they had throughout the year. And there are questions about whether that can persist. Like, are we going to see Cal Raleigh hit 60 home runs again? Probably not. We had never seen a catcher hit 50 home runs before last season. So there's going to be some drop off there. But there is that sort of second tier of teams. And I think it's especially like, who are the Dodgers going to face in the World Series? Because it does seem like there's AL teams that feel like any number of them, Mariners, Yankees, Blue Jays. We saw it last year. They took the Dodgers to the brink, as we were just talking about. Maybe even like the Tigers, might be in that conversation as this sort of last dance with Tarek Skubal, where we see a team emerge as like, okay, the Dodgers are going to be waiting for us most likely, but who's going to be that team that kind of goes in there? But maybe I'm misreading. I mean, again, it didn't seem like anyone in the NL could especially hang with the Dodgers, but there are maybe some teams that, like, if the Phillies are healthy, maybe if the Cubs continue to build, maybe if the Mets live up to that payroll, they could have something to say about this as well.
Yeah, I was sad to read about that the Steel consensus because I also had like the Mariners as the alternative.
It's such a
Um,
cute pick, right? It's like a
yeah,
fun, like, I could see it
right.
happening, and we almost did see the Dodgers lose to the team that beat the Mariners. So it's like you could see it happening if you squint. But is it is it the most likely? Not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly strong in the AL. They got that roster continuity. I mean, that's certainly a big part of it. But yeah, they were like kind of like a cute pick. Obviously the Mets, I don't think that you can not have them in the conversation. Really high ceiling, really high variance, right? I mean, the Mets have kind of been known for that pretty much since I'm a kid. I grew up in Queens, just 15 minutes
Mhm.
outside of Shea. So I'm very, very fluent in, Mets variants. But look, if it all clicks, we could be talking about a real powerhouse, right? But it could also fall apart and, Mets fans are again miserable. And also I think the AL East, whoever wins that by attrition, probably a top contender as well. Yankees certainly put their stamp on things
Last night.
last night. Even with Aaron Judge getting the golden sombrero by what, inning six. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that was I had a stat on that where so I looked at this is for Scoreboard, which is my newsletter with Sherwood News. Go check that out. Everybody, put a quick plug in there. But I looked at basically among hitters who had 4 or more strikeouts on opening day, who were the best hitters of all time to have that happen to them. And in terms of career WAR going into that performance, only Harmon Killebrew, who at age 38 in 1975 had 4 strikeouts in opening day of that year, had more WAR going into that year than Aaron Judge. We don't see that type of performance happen to a player of that magnitude all that often. But like you said, the Yankees, they won by a touchdown regardless. Max Fried had a great game, so it was a good start to the year for them. 161 left to go. But like I said last night, I posted on notes. You'd rather win than lose. Like as much as it's like, hey, small sample, let's not overreact, which I think is going to be a theme for both of us during this live stream. It's certainly better to win than to lose.
Yeah, and you won decisively, 7-0 with
Yeah,
arguably your best player contributing nothing.
yeah,
That's a big statement, right? And we know Judge is going to hit, right? Who knows how many home runs he's going to hit? He's going for what, his fourth career 50 home run season, or fifth
yeah.
career 50 home run season. But like you said, I mean, it's opening night, right? I mean, it's one data point on what, 400 to 600 plate appearances, that we're gonna see. It's tough. I'm not saying I'm gonna log off here and bet on some Aaron Judge unders, but it's certainly something to look at. Like you said, history is not kind to those type of situations. Obviously, baseball is different now than when Killebrew was playing. So we'll wait and see. But there's going to be a lot of a lot of talk if Judge gets off to a slow start, right? And the Yankees are still winning. New York's a powder keg of media to begin with, especially when the stars don't perform. It'll
You
be
don't
it'll be an
say.
interesting start to the season for sure. I'm not saying I'm rooting for that, but I do like chaos.
Yeah, I mean, it's always more interesting when the Yankees are good, but maybe not like too good. So there's a lot
Well,
of kind of messiness going on with like the media and all this, and they've had that the past few years. And just to kind of note, like whether you're looking at even just sort of like the fun little consensus thing that we did, or the projections themselves, I think they both have the AL East as maybe the most undecided or most up in the air division, where a bunch of different teams have at least, I think, like a 20% chance or better to win. And I don't know, it could be a lot of different teams, whether it's the Yankees, the Blue Jays were right there, obviously, at the end of last year, the Red Sox. You never know what you're going to get out of them. I feel like I've written something about them being the kind of chaotic team of the past 20 years. Every time you think they'll be good, they have a bad season. Every time you think they'll be bad, they have a good season. So you don't know. And then the Orioles, I think, might be the most interesting of all the teams in there, because a couple of years ago, they were supposed to be rising to become this like dynasty potential team, the youngest team in baseball, and also won 101 games. It's like that doesn't happen all that often. And yet I think everything that could have gone wrong last year kind of did go wrong. I know the front office got a lot of blame for not solidifying that pitching staff, but at the same time, there were far deeper problems than that even. And so they've kind of made a lot of changes. We talked about the Mets reshuffling. Pete Alonso is now a Baltimore Oriole. That's going to be kind of interesting to see. I know it's just going to be so bizarre to see him in that uniform. But that's an easy guy to root for. So I'm curious to see what the Orioles can do, but I do think that's why the AL East is probably going to be the most wide open division. And then on the other side, the other East is also kind of right there. If you're just thinking about like a split between maybe the 3 top contenders there, between the Phillies, who are the more proven commodity, but maybe getting a little longer in the tooth. They suffered some losses. The Mets, the perennial big spenders that haven't been able to kind of achieve their full potential. And then the Braves were another team sort of similar to the Orioles, where they go from being this absolute juggernaut just a few years ago to having kind of the season from hell. They have a lot of guys that are healthier and kind of back, and so they're right there in that mix as well. I think I saw the over unders at Polymarket had the Braves as like the second best team in the NL, at least in terms of total wins behind the Dodgers. They were like 10 wins behind the Dodgers, so it's like not especially close second, but I don't think you would have maybe thought that. At least I wouldn't have going in, just because of what a down year they had last year. But then you think like Acuna was out, Sale was out, like a lot of their guys. Austin Riley had he was hurt and had a down year, and so when they are 100%, which they almost never are, and Spencer Strider is still on the injured list, and so they still always have these injury questions, but they can kind of put it together for the majority of the season. We might remember how scary the Braves were, because I think we've kind of forgotten how scary they seemed.
Yeah, and I think you have these tight divisions. Obviously, two things are gonna probably decide it, right? Injuries, who could stay the healthiest, the longest,
Which
and
is bad for the
also
Mets because they
right,
always have
right.
injuries.
And also what happens in the midseason, right? Like who makes the first move? What's the first domino to fall to get some reinforcements to make the run, right? I mean, there's gonna be someone that's gonna make one big move that's gonna set off a chain of events that for everyone else to kind of catch up. And those are the two main things that I'm watching. And also to bring it back to the Braves, I think Acuna is a really good value play for NL MVP. I think, like you said, I mean, no one's really they're certainly not taking the Braves as seriously as the Dodgers, but if they're going to have success, chances are a lot of it's going to center around Acuna. And I do think that he's probably one of the better bets in terms of the NL MVP if you have access to those markets. Because, like I said, no, he's, question marks about injury. Also, the Dodgers are sucking up a lot of the oxygen in the room. And I think maybe that's certainly something that I'm looking into.
Oh, I think that's a really smart pick. I'm glad that you said that because, yeah, Otani right now has greater than even odds to win the MVP at FanDuel. He's minus 140. And then Soto is second at plus 700. And you can construct, if the Mets do well, it's similar to what you were saying about if the Braves do well, Acuna is a big part of that. Soto is going to be the key to kind of everything that the Mets do in a lot of ways. As I believe now we have first pitch on opening day. Look at that. We're underway.
Was it
But
challenged?
no, well, I don't know. Did they cut away for a manager interview? Because I think that's when,
Oh, we got
like,
commercial. Yeah.
yeah, that's when we're going to have it happen. But then just to close up the point on the MVP, Acuna is third, but he's at plus 1100, which is sort
Right.
of in a tier beyond, the certainly Otani and Soto. So I think that's a really smart pick. And by the way, just want to say thanks to everyone for joining. It seems like we've got a lot of people in here. If you want to ask us any questions during the live stream, drop them in the chat and we'll try to answer them as best we can with opinions that range from highly informed to barely informed. So that's what we're going to go for here on this. So yeah, I think just in general, it is kind of appropriate that they are starting with the Mets and the Pirates, because I think the Pirates have gotten a lot of buzz over the off season just for like almost kind of trying to win, which was so different than maybe usual business out there, and building around schemes and just in general kind of trying to put together a supporting cast that could do something this season. I'm really interested to see. I think the projections still were not all that super high on them, which I was a little surprised by, but then you think like, well, they only won 71 games last year, and that was with Skeens having this incredible, like almost 8 WAR season, 1.97 ERA. Obviously, wins the Cy Young, and yet there's only so much that you can do, even with a pitcher like that as your ace, to kind of drag the whole team further. But it seems like the vibes are better around this team than they've been in a really long time, and so that has to count for something, I think.
Yeah, and they've also kind of made this transition, right, to a team that's trying to compete, not just develop, right? I feel like we've talked about the Pirates, just always either stockpiling future assets or trying to get stuff going. And now it seems that they finally turned the corner into a true contender. we can argue about fringe contender, but it's interesting to see how that's changed. And also, I mean, the pitching has just been phenomenal. I mean, I've seen like Pitching Ninja put the overlays of all his different pitches, and it's like literally like a starburst of just in the tunnel once they come out going all different directions. Um, you know, the Pirates also feel like they've been building to something, whereas the Mets are kind of like a Frankenstein roster, right? Like they just put everything together, right? Like they just got players and put all these pieces together and trying to skip the rebuilding step, go straight to contender. Whereas at least the Pittsburgh Pirates kind of were trying to build stuff. So this game is kind of a matchup between I think two different ways we got here, right? Like they're both really
Totally.
good teams, but they've definitely gotten here in two very different ways.
Yeah, and that's sort of the nature of things. By the way, we just got a home run, so it's already 2 runs on the board for the Pirates, to start the year. That got a little bit of a steel welding mask going on. I think it was Brandon Lau, might have hit that home run, so that's fun, off of Freddie Peralta, and that's sort of Freddie Peralta was one of the guys the Mets got because their pitching had been so, very inconsistent, very, just unreliable, especially last season. That was kind of part of their downfall, and not super great to see him immediately, maybe like 2 batters in, give up a 2-run home run, but, yeah, I think that's a great point about the diverging paths. And if you are the Mets and you are owned by Steve Cohen, you have all of these other both tools and also pressures that you have that a team like maybe the Pirates don't have. The Pirates are going to build like a conventional smaller market team, and we've seen teams like the Rays. I know we didn't talk about them in the AL East. It seems like they're sort of going through a little bit of a rare rebuild cycle, but we've seen them also exceed expectations in moments like that. But I think that's maybe what the Pirates are trying to kind of thread the needle of. Like, you draft and develop a lot of guys, you come into this, not to abuse this term that's been overused, but I think Skeens is a generational pitcher. And so you got to make the best of it while you can, but it is part of a more traditional build, whereas the Mets have just, it's like when all you have is a hammer, all you see is nails. And when all you have is this massive payroll and the potential to spend, you almost sort of can't resist the temptation to go out and sign a bunch of guys. And that comes with its own, like that. We joked about the Mets being injured all the time. I don't think that's a coincidence based on how they tend to build. It's like when you go after free agents, you go after veterans, you maybe don't do as much of the younger development as you do, or it's just harder for those guys to kind of find a role and break through. You're gonna face more injuries just by definition. And it's going to maybe add to the variance that you have as a team, also, where it's like injuries, they're part of the game for every team. And if you're like the Dodgers, we were just talking about how you almost the whole exercise of the regular season for the Dodgers is building insurance against injuries. But also, if you just build this veteran laden team, they might be more exposed to that. And suddenly your team that looks on paper like, whatever their over under or projection was, like a 90 plus win team going into the season, can very quickly turn into like a 75, 80 win team just with a handful of injuries happening that you didn't see coming. And you can't necessarily really do anything about. I mean, you can only fire the training staff and bring in new trainers so much before you have to kind of think about other things that you might do to combat that.
Yeah, and I think Steve Cohen was under a lot of pressure to spend money quickly, right? I mean, he's obviously worth a gazillion dollars. The Mets are in the biggest markets, one of the biggest markets. They're dwarfed in spending by the crosstown rivals. So I almost think that like it was, I wouldn't say it was to placate fans, but that was like a big item on fans' lists of, okay, can we finally spend some money, get some people in here and get this roster going? I think Steve Cohen did that. But again, I mean, it's baseball. It's not always spending the most money, like you said. It's how you spend it, and especially now with teams being smarter about how they're building rosters, how they're locking up key guys earlier and earlier, how they're willing to spend money earlier on more proven commodities. like you said, when you get to free agents who are on the other side of the aging curve, there's just more that can go wrong, right? I mean, there's just more things that, more downside, I think, than upside. And, you like to think that everything's going well with the money that you spent and that you're going to be certainly a contender. You're certainly going to be talked about. But, you have one or two key components break down. I don't know if the other components can help pick up the slack enough, right? Because their ceiling's capped, right? A 29-year-old veteran, a 30-year-old veteran, their ceiling is not going to be as high as a 25-year-old phenom. And it just becomes much, much harder to do that. But I think that you almost have no choice but to spend money because, you look around you with the Dodgers, the Yankees, and then in your own division, the Phillies and the Braves, you don't have the luxury of rebuilding what 3, 4 years. I mean, like that's just not going to be tolerable in New York. I don't think, especially with a guy that's worth so much money, they're expecting him to spend it.
And Steve Cohen himself, grew up a Mets fan. I do think that he's like kind of a fascinating character because there's this duality between the fan in him, who's like this kind of the ultimate dream of any baseball fan kid in a candy shop. Basically, you've got all this money and you have the ability to spend it on any players that you want to, as long as they want to come sign. And you pried away Juan Soto from the Yankees. I mean, that's like probably that might be their biggest win of the
Yeah.
Cohen era, and it didn't even happen on the field. Which make of that what you will. But I do think that there's that aspect, and then there's like his background is like he's a quant guy. He's a hedge fund, kind of like trying to take the long view and make the numbers work in your favor and play the percentages and not make rash decisions that a fan would make. So I do think that like where the Mets fall on that spectrum between Cohen the fan and Cohen the cold numerical analyst is a really interesting one, and we maybe saw him fall, especially at first, too far on the fan end of the spectrum and not far enough on the rational analyst spectrum. And maybe he's changed and maybe not. They're still a veteran laden team. It's just kind of different veterans than it was at different times, and maybe a little more prime age guys. And they didn't make the emotional decision to bring back Pete Alonso or some fan favorites. So that might indicate that there might be a little bit of a change in approach away from that fandom aspect. As now we get Paul Skeens on the mound for the first time in 2026, which is always just like it's electric. You talked about. I love the pitching ninja videos in general. I find myself getting recommended those on YouTube Shorts like constantly, and I can't not watch them. But just the stuff with Skeens is really incredible. So this is a great matchup with him and Francisco Lindor as well. How much we're gonna see like individual plate appearances and battles like this, and it's one game. How should we react to anything that happens today or even this week or even this month or even the next few months? Like, what's your thought on when we start to kind of actually putting stock in things versus like emotionally reacting to like if Skeens gets a strikeout here, if Lindor hits a home run, we're like, we're so back or it's so over off of like one play.
Yeah, I'm actually going to write this up from a betting perspective, but it's right now you just enjoy it, right? Like you can't make um any big decision changes unless something structural happens, right? If Paul Skeen's right arm, falls off, obviously you want to make some adjustments. If
God
there
forbid.
God forbid, right? If there's injuries, you want to make some adjustments. If you see a batter improve and then you can kind of work it back to some work he did with the batting coach and he's standing in the box differently, his hands are different, he's doing something, fundamentally different with his swing, then you could put some stock in that. But generally speaking, I would say almost for most, if not all of April, not a whole lot of it means much, right? I mean, it's going to be these isolated incidents that happen. I would say for the first 30 games or so, you could ignore almost anything. The next 30 games, it's a pretty weak signal. The 30 games after that starts to stabilize. Then after 100 games, you start to see something meaningful. 100 games is also what, 2/3 of the season, almost, the season is coming to a close at that point, at least turning the corner. So it's a lot of, well, yeah, duh, this team is good, this team is not good type stuff. But you got to be careful. I mean, we're going to see a lot of hot takes over the next week, right? We're going to see
We
stuff.
might commit some of them. Well, I
Yeah,
don't wanna speak for you, I might.
you're gonna see a lot of interesting opinions come out, from the yelling shows and everything like that based on what we see last night, today, this week. But
Aaron Judge is cooked.
by and large, yeah, no, what, 400 strikeout season on pace
Oh,
for,
yeah.
something like that.
He's
Uh,
easily on pace
yeah,
for so
yeah,
many strikeouts.
biggest bust. 400 strikeouts, 0 home runs. But again, I mean, but that's what makes baseball fun, I think, right? Watching your team that maybe you don't think is very good have a really good open, or, they get a guy that you've been really excited about and he goes 4 for 4 with 2 stolen bases. I mean, that's stuff to get excited about. Doesn't necessarily mean we're seeing the next Ted Williams, but it certainly beats the alternative of seeing a 2 home run shot off of Peralta in, the first inning of opening day.
Well, and we did see the next Ted Williams that a lot of people have called him, Juan Soto, single to right field just then, and then almost get thrown out because he took too wide of a turn around first base.
That tracks. I've seen a
But
lot of Juan Soto. That tracks.
yeah, it's like kind of the good and bad of him in one play encapsulated. But that's why I think one of the baseball's greatest strengths, just in general, not just on opening day, but like any given day when you go to the ballpark, they're at Citi Field right now. So many games, especially when I lived in New York, the Mets were almost uniformly bad or mediocre or disappointing, aside from that one 2015 World Series year, which even that was like looking not so great until halfway. But so many times would I go out to this ballpark and just buy a cheap ticket, sit in the stands, and like you knew that even no matter how bad the team was, there was some chance that you could see them win in a way that if you went to, like right now, we're in prime tanking season in the NBA. If you go to a Washington Wizards game or any of these Utah Jazz, some of these teams, you not only know that you probably won't see them win, you don't want them to win.
Right.
It's like this very kind of sick, perverse experience of almost anti-fandom that is bred in basketball because it is so deterministic. There isn't that randomness element where upsets can happen more often. Whereas in baseball, any team could beat any other team and it would really not be surprising, and the odds almost never stray from being like 60-40 in any direction for any particular game, unless it's like Pedro Martinez in his prime starting for the Red Sox or whatever. And so I think that's great about baseball. It does limit the amount of information that we can kind of take away from any particular game, which as analysts maybe not the best. We would love to have more decisiveness like we get. Think about if baseball was like if the NFL was like baseball, where we have this one game and then we spend all week processing this game that happened and we talk about it, breathlessly. And what if it like doesn't even mean that much? The cadence of the NFL is lucky that each game does mean a lot more than in baseball, but it's just even silly to think about. Whereas in baseball, we've got 10 times as many games, and that's for a good reason because each individual game is so overwhelmed by randomness relative to the skill of the two teams, which is great when you go to the ballpark and you just want to see some baseball and not know who's going to win.
Yeah, I mean, what's the saying? A bad day at the on the golf course is better than a regular day, or something like that. Same thing for baseball. I think, being in the stands and just seeing your team have a chance, no matter how, woeful they may be. I mean, 10-win teams beat 70-win teams relatively often enough to make it enjoyable. But also I think that's also helps the regular season. I mean, it wasn't too long ago in basketball where on game 1, people were penciling in the Golden State Warriors versus whatever team LeBron was on, right? And
Right.
for 4 or 5 years, the regular season meant nothing to anybody. Here it's much, much different. And again, I know we talked about the Dodgers, but that's one team, and there's still a lot more that can happen. And even with how good the Dodgers are, I think Fangraphs has them as what, like 25% chance to win the
Yeah, I
World
was gonna
Series?
say it's really a 75% chance they
That's right.
don't
Right.
win.
So I think no matter how good they are, even the most optimistic case means that we're likely gonna see someone else win the World Series. I think people need to keep that in mind, right? I mean, just because we're talking about the Dodgers being so good and they may set, records and they spend all this money, it still does not guarantee the end result. They still have to play the games. And, even if you said that they were 50-50 to win the World Series, you're still a coin flip away from seeing someone else win it.
Yeah, and that's what makes baseball interesting, versus other sports. So, I think that, now by the end of the postseason, we'll be like, I beat that drum all year last year because I was tired of hearing I guess I put on my contrarian hat. I was so tired of hearing people kinda talk about, like, payroll, like, as though it guaranteed a championship for them, and so I wanted to kind of make the point in the opposite direction of like there's not that strong of a correlation between
Right.
payroll and winning in baseball. And even if there was, the favorites do not have that much of a chance to win the World Series. Now, that looked a little foolish by the end of the season when it's now the Dodgers have won two consecutive World Series and they're going for a third straight. And they're certainly they don't have the majority of the odds. They have the plurality of the odds to win the World Series. And so, you know, I do think also, and I wanted to get your read on this. I think one of the big themes of this season is this last dance quality to it overall. When we're talking about the looming potential for a lockout or just an overall kind of CBA fight after the season. The CBA expires on December 1st, I want to say, and I think everybody is preparing and digging in for this, potential to lose games next year. And the Dodgers have kind of been weaponized in that, where the league and maybe people that repeat the league's talking points and they become kind of useful for the league and narratively talk about whenever they talk about how the Dodgers feel inevitable and the payroll is causing it and there's competitive imbalance because of all the spending. I mean, I get it on a particular level as well, but I do think that also ignores the reality of what we've just been talking about, the chaotic, random element of it. But then there's also the factor of like, do you really want to go as a league and make your argument that, hey, this super team isn't necessarily going to win just because of randomness? Like, hey, our sport has meaninglessness built into it, and so watch our sport. So I do think they're a little bit between a rock and a hard place, and I also know that the Dodgers being this outlier of spending has been very convenient for Rob Manfred and the owners to be able to make this case of like, hey, look at this. This is out of control. We need a salary cap, which of course is something that the players have resisted pretty steadfastly, and I feel like they'll go to war to avoid having.
Yeah, I get the argument for the salary cap. It certainly is tough to see one team spend 300 million, another team spend what, 50 million or
Yeah.
whatever it is on the bottom end. That's a huge gap, and I know they've tried different things to make soft caps and penalties and stuff like that. But what we've learned is that the penalties don't matter, right? Because the reward is far greater than what the penalty is. And I think if you have a salary cap, it doesn't mean every team is gonna spend that much money. I don't know what that's gonna necessarily you'll stop the Dodgers and the Mets of the world from spending, over 300 million or whatever they put the cap at, but it's not gonna make other teams spend $300 million,
Well, you need
right?
a floor,
That's the
to
thing, right?
go with the cap.
You need the floor, I think is way more important to at least rise, bring the bottom teams up into semi contention, right? No one's expecting every team to be competitive every year, but I do think these teams that get subsidized by the larger team, the more free spending teams, is a bigger problem. And quite frankly, there's no salary cap on R&D, right? I've said this a bunch of times in many different sports. We've seen hockey really take this to heart in terms of outspending competition in R&D, and Washington Capitals bought this website called Cap Geek, which was pretty much the salary cap of all the players and forecasting and stuff like that. Um,
That was a
so
great go-to site.
yeah,
RIP.
yeah, a lot of people miss that site even today, except for the Caps. But it's the R&D part of it, the smart teams are going to figure out ways to just use their money more efficiently, right? And I think that's what the Dodgers have done. I don't think that they've overspent. Like I said, I think that they've spent to reduce their risk, and they're able to do that because they're the Dodgers and they have just gobs of money. But I think a salary floor is way more important. I think bringing the lower teams, making them spend more, not just getting subsidized, is way more important. But I also think the smart teams are going to figure out how to optimize the salary cap. I mean, there's just a lot to baseball. Where baseball is so advanced now in terms of analytics, like so far ahead, I think, of every other sport in terms of just the fire hose of data that they have and how they manage that data and work with that data. So I think the best teams will just figure out ways to work within the cap more optimally. I don't think it's going to solve the problem that everyone else does. There's still going to be teams that spend the cap, and there's still going to be teams that don't come close to spending the cap. And the teams that spend to the cap are going to be, on average, more successful.
Yeah, I agree. And the question of if, it feels like if you're going to get the players to agree to a cap, you're going to have to give a floor. And then where you set that floor is going to be a very fascinating and messy and really interesting question, because when if you even if you set it like 100 million last year, I believe there would be like 8 to 10 teams that were below that would have to spend up, including teams like the Marlins and the A's. They would have to like double their salary basically to get to that point. And that's if you set it at, I think, I don't even think 100. I think the proposed number that was floated around in some of those reports a couple weeks ago was above that. So you're going to kind of see like this civil war between owners in some ways, where, yes, people want to rein in the Dodgers, but is it going to be worth going to the mat to also get teams like even the Pirates right now, but also especially like the A's and the Marlins and the Rays and teams like that to spend up to a particular level? And how are you going to do that? Is there going to be revenue sharing that kind of comes together? I saw people were floating the idea of the fact that Netflix is in the mix now is part of this concerted effort, especially with the collapse of the regional sports networks, which is another huge factor behind all of this. Really, that's a lot of money that they're not going to have access to anymore. Is this idea of nationalizing the television contracts and making it more that NFL model, where it's a lot more viable in the NFL? It's a little unfair to teams maybe like the Cowboys or Patriots to have this sort of shared pool national TV money when those teams are more popular than other ones. But generally, it kind of works to placate the owners, where they kind of pool their resources. They have these huge television contracts. They're all nationally done, and they're able to kind of use that to pay the players a fixed amount relative to revenue. I think baseball wants to move in that direction, and they're going from like a purely regional model with some national television on top of that, but it was not a big driver, to this other model that's trying to mimic more of what the NFL is doing. And we'll see whether they can thread that needle. I don't think we've seen a sport do that successfully, because they haven't had to. Baseball is really this test case of what happens when this model of getting the money out of the regional sports networks for so long, that has floated along the whole economics of this sport, basically disappears overnight. Like 5 years ago, maybe we were kind of seeing the trend, and certainly cord cutting was a thing at that point, but it really has reached ahead in the past 5 years, and now it's getting to the point where I think the vast majority of teams don't have a regional sports network deal, and they're doing their stuff kind of directly streaming through MLB TV and the partnership there with like ESPN Plus. And then you have teams like the Dodgers who still do have the regional sports network, and they still do make that money. So I think that's going to be a very difficult part to unpack of this whole CBA conversation that I don't think it's talked about as much. We're talking about the cap and all this stuff, and we're not really talking about these revenue sources that drive what teams are able to and willing to spend.
Yeah, and the floor is going to be, you're just going to have the teams that spend the least spend to the floor, right? So I don't think they're going to have
Yeah.
a meaningful bump in any sort of performance. I think what's going to happen is the middle class of players is going to be squeezed, right? The stars will always get their money, and the players at the lower end of the spectrum are just going to be given enough to meet the floor, right? So like the middle class of players is not going to get nearly as much as they used to,
Yeah.
because the bottom teams aren't going to want to spend any more than they have to, and they want to going to get as cheap players as they possibly can, which inevitably will be the worst players.
Stars
So
and scrubs. That's the
right. So
model.
it's gonna be I think the problem is gonna be worse. Because like I said, you're gonna spend more money on less. And that's why I said like the R&D of teams is gonna be able to be a lot more efficient in what they spend, because there's gonna be a greater pool of players that are gonna be undervalued, because they're they're set to make more than the players that get like the minimum tight to make the floor, but not quite what they would get at the star level.
Yeah, totally. By the way, Paul Skeens out of this game, knocked out in the first inning, giving up 5 runs already, and the Mets have runners on first and second, with 1 out. I don't
This is
think,
the parallel universe. This is
this
the timeline.
yeah, this is also the small sample for us to completely overreact to.
Yeah.
What is going on? Should I change my
Fade
NL
them,
Cy
fade
Young pick?
them, fade Pirates, fade Skeens, and all the individual awards, fade everybody.
Yeah.
In all
Well,
seriousness, this is if you are looking to bet Skeens in any sort of end of season awards, this is a great
yeah, buy
opportunity,
low.
because they're gonna make some adjustments on this. Maybe not exactly right now, maybe not tomorrow, but this is the type of thing that moves markets a little bit. Overreactions, money comes in on other players. They move it a little bit, and the edges on baseball are razor thin as it is. So if this moves it even a little bit into plus territory or something like that, I think that's definitely something to investigate.
Well, just at Polymarket, because it updates so quickly in real time, Skeens to win the NL Cy Young at 12:26 p.m. Central for me. I'm in Central, so 1:26. So right after the game started was 51%, and now it's down to 43% in real
That's
time.
huge.
So
That's a huge
yeah,
move.
that's a crazy
That's
move
a
of 8
huge
percentage
move.
points. Yeah,
Yeah,
in
for
the
one
span of
outing, 37
25 minutes.
as long as he's not hurt,
Yeah,
that's the type of thing that you can take advantage of. Again, you have to wait and make sure he's not hurt, or,
yeah.
just go on the assumption he's not hurt, had a bad outing, because, the Mets are this juggernaut, $300 million juggernaut, and no one could stand in their way. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
should
this
look
is,
up what the Mets World Series, futures also have gone up
yeah,
to in this.
it
But
just
yeah, he
be,
threw this was tied for the most runs he's ever given up in his career through 37 pitches and recorded 2 outs.
yep.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a lot of hot takes tomorrow, boy. A
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
hot
So
takes.
many. So, yeah, look for Stephen A's take on
Parlay,
Dane Cook.
Judge MVP and Skeens, Cy
Yes.
Young. There you go.
Yes. Well, hey, we should get to some of the questions. So we got just J Rod, one of my favorite subscribers. He put in whether the Reds or Pirates could grab a wild card spot in the NL.
Pirates,
Well, the
nope.
Pirates, they're totally done now.
Nope.
They're completely finished at this point. But no, I mean, I think aside from this, obviously this is a bad start from their best player, not the best start to the season, but I still think, they've got an outside shot. I think it was around like 25-30% in the I do this like consensus forecast where I mash together a bunch of different models and have it simulate things a bunch of times. And they were at 26.2% to make the playoffs for that. 10% coming or 11% coming from the division, which the division is an interesting one too. The Brewers seem to be diminished, and Jackson Churio just got hurt as well and went to the injured list with a broken hand. So another kind of bad sign for them. I don't love the vibes around them. Which I love the vibes for them last season, but it does seem like maybe some regression is coming. The Cubs, we're just always asking whether they're going to do anything and live up to their potential, and they did at times last year. Really interested to see what happens with Pete Crow Armstrong. He signs that huge contract, and this is a guy that in the first half of the season looked like he was, going to be
MVP.
one of these. Yeah, like an MVP candidate, which was not necessarily expected, but you could kind of see it. It's like, okay, young outfielder, great defensively, kind of a breakout type of thing. And then down the stretch, just completely disappeared. Ended up with a really horrendous on base percentage. Like if you look at his OBP, I think it was below 300 by season's end, and yet. The Cubs certainly see the potential there, and they re-signed him to that big extension. And they're going to be a team to be reckoned with, I think, at a certain point in that division. But the Reds could be in that mix as well. They're bringing back Eugenio Suarez, in addition to some little improvements they've made around the edges. But I love watching Ellie De La Cruz. That's kind of the main thing that I think we all go to when it comes to the Reds. But the NL Central, I had the stat the other day about like what win total would it take for you to win each particular division in these simulations, and the NL Central was one of the ones where it was kind of on the easier end. The AL Central was the easiest. If you win 89 games, you would have a 51% chance to win that division, which is like, kind of a low bar on some level. But the break even point for the NL Central was the second easiest, which is if you win like 91 and a half games, you would be more favored to win that division versus not. So I think that speaks to just how there are teams like the Pirates and the Reds that have the ability to potentially surprise people if the Brewers slip up.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Brewers. I actually like the Brewers this year as one of these teams that have a high ceiling. I know they have some injuries that they're dealing with, but even without Freddie Peralta, I think the rotation, the bullpen's pretty good. Farm system is solid. They can have a lot of in season flexibility, and they've gone over their win total in 8 of the last 9 seasons, so they're like perennially undervalued
Totally.
and underrated. So I actually like the Brewers as kind of the team. We talk about, for betting in particular, you all these win totals and all of our predictions are just guesses, right? And what we really want to know is like how big the bars are, right? Like if you have an 80 win team, are they 75 to 90? And if you have another 80 win team, are they like 70 to 100? So you want to, I think the Brewers have some what we call tails, right? They have some bigger tails than people are giving them credit for. So I actually like the upside of the Brewers. And I actually do like them in the NL Central. And I think your ELO ratings have them relatively high comparably to some other rankings that are out there.
They do, certainly the ones from, like, that I'm updating through the season. So, yeah, I have, like, I have the version that I did sort of as, like, the preseason that mashes together the different models, and then I have the one that's just the regressed version of last year. I'm gonna be updating that second one throughout the year just because it's, like, easier to kinda keep that continuity between seasons where you've got, okay, this was this team's rating at the end of last season, and you've got this predictable change to it. I didn't wanna mix in the fact that, hey, FanDuel thinks that the Brewers have lost a lot. Freddie Peralta is really going to hurt them, but I don't have that for like the '92 Brewers going into '93 or something
Right.
like that. So that's kind of why I do that. I think that'll become more reliable as we go deeper into the season. But I that's a good point also that like just normal regression to the mean would have them be one of the top teams in the National League. And the fact that stat that you have is really fascinating because it does check out about them beating the over unders in many different years, because it does feel like there's this consistent, and believe me, that playoff performance last year did nothing to dispel this, but there's this consistent perception of them as like, okay, how are they doing this? We don't know necessarily that we don't think that they're among the real true contenders. It takes longer for the markets to kind of believe in them than it does other teams. Yet they're also always constantly drafting and developing guys. They're making these kind of great trades that are under the radar, and they're building up. They're this model franchise that we never talk about in those terms. And maybe it's a
Except
like
on this live Substack.
except here. Yes, you heard it here first and only. But it's a little like the Rays. I mean, the Rays, I think, were easier to point to, and maybe the A's before them, the original Moneyball, because they had that narrative of like the
Doing
stats are what's
something, right.
driving it. Yeah. Whereas with the Brewers, I mean, they're certainly very
It's that
savvy.
meme, it's like, like
Yeah, it's it's like how are they doing this? They're very savvy with the stats, and they've had a number of GMs. David Stern's alumnus of that organization. As we're watching the Mets now, but they have people that know their way around a spreadsheet or two. But for some reason, we just don't assign them the same narrative around how they're able to kind of do that. And so we are left with that kind of shruggy expression where it's just like, I don't know how they're doing this, but every single year. And they turned over almost their whole roster. Like they did it once. and they came out of nowhere in maybe like, late 2010s, early 2020s, and caught everyone by surprise. And then they did it again like last year or the last couple of years, where they completely turned over their whole team and also caught people by surprise. So maybe don't bet against the Brewers going forward.
Yep. I do like them as a surprise team, and I think, talking about the salary cap, I mean, this is a team that knows what they're doing in baseball, right? And the salary cap's not gonna affect them. The salary
No,
floor
not
is
at
probably
all.
not gonna affect them. And they may even get better value on players because, as I talked before, the middle class gets squeezed. So I think the smarter teams are gonna do a lot better in a salary cap situation because, like I said, the teams at the floor are just gonna spend to the floor. I don't even think they're gonna care how they get there. It's just like you and I can go step on the field and get paid some money as long as they're spending the money, and they don't really care if they're getting 20 wins or 30 wins.
Yeah, nothing says that you have to use the players that you
Right.
kind of throw that money at to get over the floor. And the NHL is kind of maybe a test case for leagues that have this hard cap, and they have a very very tight window between the floor and the cap. And I think that we've seen shenanigans where teams like there's some averaging process where they have to be above the floor for some amount of window of time or something. So we've seen them manipulate who they send up or call up or who they give contracts to, but then bury in order to kind of be in compliance. So there's going to be some chicanery happening around how teams manage that if the floor does get put in.
And hockey actually has 2 different numbers. They have a cash number and they have a salary cap
Yeah.
number. So you can actually trade for a guy whose salary cap number is like 10 million a year, but his actual cash outlay is only 1 million. And like the bottom feeding teams love that because they're spending $1 to get $10 of cap space. So I don't know that that's exactly how the MLB is going to be, but again, there's no perfect solution in this type of situation, right? I mean, there's just different markets, there's different revenue streams, there's different marketing potentials, all that other stuff. But I understand baseball is under a lot of pressure to do this. At least I think optically, I think it's gonna be even more if the Dodgers win their third straight World Series
Oh
after
my God.
spending the most money, and the Mets are even in the mix, right? Like right now, that's the counterweight is, well, the Mets spend all this money and they can't do what the Dodgers do. But if they have success, obviously, if the Yankees are successful, which we're imagining they are, I just think that snowball is really going to start to roll down the hill.
Yeah, the Mets not making the playoffs was like the ultimate kind of counter argument for the Dodgers winning so many World Series. But yeah, it seems like you can kind of hold that off for so long. Now we've got a question somewhat related to that from Cam Smith in the chat about whether the looming lockout might make teams more aggressive around the trade deadline and whether we see teams kind of shake things up. I'm really curious about this. I don't know what your read is on that because I could see it also teams being afraid to do things beyond maybe just sort of rentals, which the deadline could certainly provide because they just don't know. They don't know what's going to be grandfathered in. They don't know anything beyond this season. But what's your read on that?
I think that you're going to see big ticket players become um, perhaps a little more valuable for the teams that need to get to the floor, right? To spend to the floor. If they could do it with just one player, then that could be ideal. Um, I I think that we're also going to see probably in the early stages a lot of non-committal, right? We're not going to see a lot of commitments for big money over big years until we know what it is. You're going to see a lot of the younger players be held on to, I think, a little bit more, or at least cost a lot more to get because they're cost controlled. And that's obviously going to be very desirable in a salary cap world to know what your outlay is versus what your production might be. So I think there's going to be, like I said, I think the biggest thing will be a big squeeze in the middle. But I think that the trades for the older expiring contracts that are big, if you can have a guy for 1 year, but have him account for what could be a third of the salary cap or close to a third of the salary cap or a fourth of the salary cap. I think that there'll be a lot more situations where they'll be desirable, or you may even have to pay a team to take a player like that, right? I mean, and maybe give up something desirable to get a player like that off your books.
Yeah, and I think it could just take us from an environment where trades seemed in baseball now. I mean, the money is obviously a consideration, but it has traditionally always been more about the qualities and merits of the players, and there is certainly the time windows of like veterans versus prospects and all of that. But the NFL is a sport where, because of the hard cap, a lot of the moves that get made, they like almost defy a football sense. Like if you look at, you see players that are good, but they're not good at that price be moved, or teams almost sort of cutting people that still could potentially help them because of arcane salary cap implications. So I think that might be coming to baseball as well. The sort of like moves that the 4D chess moves, not the normal like on field production type of moves that we're used to seeing in baseball, but more of the like cap gymnastics moves for their own sake.
Yeah, and the NFL is very fine with kicking the can down the road, letting it be someone else's problem too, right? I mean, we see a lot of times where players will sign really large deals and then they have to restructure them because of salary cap constraints. I don't know if baseball is going to have that type of mechanism in there. It'll certainly be interesting if they do. But yeah, but it also instantly becomes. I mean, baseball is always a long term view when you sign somebody, but now that there's a cap and maybe a floor, like that's just an added layer of scrutiny, right? You have to really make sure that someone fits because dead cap space in any salary cap sport is an absolute detriment.
Yeah, totally, and they'll have to kind of figure out how to do that without, completely killing a team's chances to compete for a long period of time, and the NHL has had, certain, moments where they kind of give you mechanisms to get out. I remember the Allen Houston rule, which wasn't actually used on Allen Houston in the NBA, which was like the one-time amnesty to cut a player and not have them count against your cap. So there's always gonna be growing pains through that. So right now, as we're nearing the end of the second inning in this game, do we want to talk about maybe some of the things we're looking for in the games over the rest of the action this afternoon and evening? Maybe like one thing that we're looking for in each of these games up ahead.
Yeah, we can absolutely look at some of the things. I had some notes here somewhere.
I'm glad
Um,
you do. I'm kind of winging it here. Appreciate everybody who is tuning in to watch us as we're doing that. Neil Greenberg is the professional Neil in the duo. I am the one that's trying to make it on just charm and all of that. But yeah, I would say the one matchup that jumps out to me in the afternoon window. So after that is Rangers Phillies, because those are two teams. The Rangers, I've kind of been expecting or thinking that they would build upon that World Series that they won for years, haven't been able to really do it. Injuries have just completely derailed them. But I think hope springs eternal for them. They've got Nate Eovaldi on the hill, which is always like I mean, when he was healthy last year, he was unbelievable. And we've kind of memory hold that, which, so I'm curious to see that. And then the Phillies, like we said, they sustained a lot of losses. They lost a Ranger Suarez, to the Red Sox, and so they'll be getting Zach Wheeler back soon. It sounds like, so just trying to kind of see what they can still get out of that Bryce Harper era. But those are two like high talented but high variance teams to talk about what you mentioned earlier of like the range of possible wins that teams could have. I could see those teams having sort of like a lot of boom or bust potential this year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Mariners Guardians game. I wanna get some validation on my pick as the Mariners in terms of, their World Series chances. I think this is a great contrast game, right? You have one team built on elite pitching, the other kind of squeezing the margins a little bit. Seattle could have one of the best pitching staffs in the American League, especially when they're at home. You have Logan Gilbert, who's the key there. Just he's dominant at home. He's got a lot of stuff, and I'm really curious to see how the Mariners can navigate a team early like the Guardians. So I'm looking forward to the Guardians, and I mean, also the Dodgers. I mean, we just saw Skeens get lit up, right? We saw Aaron Judge in Game 1 not have a great game.
Throw out all of our priors.
Let's keep it going. Let's have, the Dodgers looking at a, 5-0 deficit in the first to the Diamondbacks. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, the other one with potential for that is the Tigers and Padres, which is at 4 p.m. with Tariq Skubal. The momentum for him to be favorite to win another AL Cy Young is probably stronger than even Skeens in the NL. And then the Padres certainly seemed like they had a lot of losses over the offseason, and the markets are not respecting them that much. But these AJ Preller teams always seem they're kind of like the bizarro version of the Brewers, because I think they always exceed expectations in that maybe a very different, more chaotic and high spending way.
Yeah.
To see them, like, what if they hang a number on Scooble right away? That would be kind of in keeping with everything else we've seen. And go back to the Guardians. They are a team that has defied the stats for a number of years. I can't tell you how many times I've written. Far be it from me to question them. I've sort of just been this detached outsider observer where I've been like, hey, they do not look very good in the Fangraphs base runs, and yet they continue to win. And that's been true for a number of seasons going, in a row. So they're sort of like, you got the teams that the markets don't respect, like the Brewers, but then you've got the teams that the stats don't respect in terms of like the Guardians. And so that's a little bit of a prove it type of, as much as one game can be, a prove it type of thing for them starting the season. And, they don't have Clase. God only knows if he'll ever play Major League Baseball again. Probably not, with the gambling scandal. So, they're not quite the same team that they've been, but they're certainly a team that has been written off by the likes of us eggheads for a little while, and they keep finding ways to beat the expectations.
Yeah, they won 88 games last year with a negative run differential.
Right.
You just don't see that very often. They remind me a lot of the Pittsburgh Steelers in football, right? They're just a team that just should not be good. Like, they just should not be good with how they score points and allow points. You know, I don't root against them, but I certainly discount them. I'm always proven wrong because of the Mike Tomlin sauce, which will be without
Well,
this coming
yeah, I was
season.
gonna say, we'll
Um,
see now.
but Cleveland is going to, carry that torch, I guess. And
Well, they've
they
won 88 or more games. Sorry to cut you off just real quick. They've won 88 or more in 3 of the past 4 years.
well, it's the young hitters, right? Like, young hitters are tough to project, right? I mean, it's tough to project um, us as you call us eggheads. Like, we're really good at projecting the middle, right? But the extremes are extremes for a reason, because they're tougher, right? It's much harder for us to project a guy to go from 10 to 60 home runs than it is for a guy to go from 20 to 30 or 30 to 20. So I think the young hitters are definitely something that helps them along. And and that goes back to kind of what we were talking about, especially, we're talking about payroll and those type of things. I mean, that's the upside that you want, right? And that's the upside that's difficult to capture if, you're spending money on veterans that are, past their prime, which in baseball terms is what, 23 to 25, 27, on the outside of it. So it's something that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, totally. And we always kind of discount those teams for whatever reason, and forget about the aging curve. So I'm interested to see what they end up doing. Now, I would love to, if anybody in the chat has extra additional questions for us, we'd love to field them as we're coming up. We're probably going to hang around for a few more minutes here, just talking baseball. It's like we said at the top of the show, it's just such a great occasion to have something like this. Hopefully, we can have more Neilcast down the line. It seems like we've got some good support here in the chat and watching at home. So we're happy to do these as much as people have the appetite for them. And man, O'Neill Cruz is at the plate. This is somebody that I
Another
wanted
Neil.
so. Another Neil, yeah. I mean, just take away that O at the beginning, and he spells it the right way. I don't know if you've ever encountered, the rivalry between the
So
I's
much,
and the A's.
so
Yeah,
much.
it's just it's like Sharks and Jets from West Side Story. We
This is
just
the real
can't.
deal.
Yeah. And so the O'Neill Cruz, I so wanted to write this story. Maybe either I'll write it or you'll write it. Someone will write it about how no player in baseball does less with more than O'Neal Cruz. He is this like Statcast god. And yet, you look at his actual production and numbers, and they're always like so underwhelming. He's still young, so maybe this is the year. But what is your take on like, there aren't a huge number of examples of that, but like when you have those underlying numbers, and we see this more with pitchers, I think, than hitters, where it's just really hard to have the exit velocities and the various different, metrics that he has and not actually be better in terms of the production and output. But like, what do you do with someone like that? Is it a buy low where you just kind of trust the process? You're like, every other player in the whole baseball universe eventually catches up to these Statcast numbers. So eventually O'Neal Cruz is going to be good, but you have to have faith in the meantime.
Yeah, I avoid these situations only because there's something we can't capture, right? Whenever you have, like in basketball, we call them like the empty calorie scorers, right? Like they get a lot of the points but don't really do much else. Here's the opposite, like you're talking about. There's something that we're not capturing. It's not an intangible, but there's something that for whatever reason the sum just doesn't equal the parts, right? And in those situations, you could go broke waiting for it to happen. So I tend to stay away from those situations. But just from like an instructive case, it's really interesting because you have a guy like you said that if you did like a blind resume, you'd be like, oh my god, it's one of the best players in the league, right? Or Moneyball darling, or however you want to characterize it. I mean, it's a situation that shows you, I think, the limits of analytics in terms of modeling and that sort of stuff, because there's an element there that we're just not capturing. And it could be a death by a thousand cuts, right? It could be a lot of little things that are happening that just aren't giving him the production that we would expect. But for me personally, I tend to avoid players like him because I can't understand him, and I'll just put myself in a corner crying if I continue.
Totally. Well, hey, we got another Brandon Lau home run, his second of the game, which makes it 5-3. So I don't know who.
Just Rod just asked for a dark horse MVP. There it is.
Hey, there you go. Yeah, bet on Brandon Lau to come out of the Pirates. I like the with the MVP and just awards in general. I do think those they're narrative awards in a lot of cases as much as anything, and that's okay. I'm not one to kind of rail about like, well, this person had a fraction more WAR than this other person, so they should be MVP, even though the story. And I was that way with Cal Raleigh last year. He did not have more measured value than Aaron Judge. But gosh darn it, when you hit 60 home runs as a catcher and the Mariners are kind of back in things and it just, he seems to be so central to that. I think I would have voted for him as MVP amidst all that, with apologies to Judge. So I do think that there's room for that, but I do think also that your betting strategy can almost be with these players to reverse engineer situations. Like, okay, what has to happen? Maybe Brandon Lau is a bad example; he's not going to win MVP. But for someone who is like one of these dark horses on a team, and think through like, okay, what set of circumstances, especially like team wise, and like who else on the team might gobble up some of the support in the voting and the narrative space. Can we create a plausible universe in which a particular player can make a realistic bid? And that might be a useful way to think about trying to find these dark horses, because you have to not only have like who's going to have a great season, but also who's going to have a great story that transcends the numbers and kind of fits in with the team and the teammates that might be competing with that credit for a team, exceeding expectations or whatever has to happen to be an MVP.
Yeah, and I think you have to start with the playoff teams, especially at the higher end of the spectrum. Those tend to be the ones that get the most pixels. That's kind of how I came to Acuna in terms of the MVP, right? I mean, kind of look at, all right, who can be on the short list of contenders? Like, who's the surprise of those? Obviously, not someone on the Dodgers. And then what needs to go right? Well, if he's healthy, right? We know what he brings to the table if he's healthy. He could be 40 home runs, 70 steals type season. That's obviously going to generate a lot of WAR, which is a really good litmus test for the MVP, especially in the NL. But I do think that you want to look at teams that like you said, could have the narrative behind you. Two dark horses I'm looking at is Nick Kurtz on the Athletics.
Yes. Love that.
This is if he gets hot, unlike O'Neal, right? Like if he gets hot, it's going to carry over into the stats, right? Like we're going to be talking about him. He had 36 home runs in 117 games. That's a lot of upside there for sure.
Oh, he
Uh,
could easily have like a 50 home run season over a whole
and the
year.
MVP narrative loves that, right? I mean, and I'm with you. It's kind of like the Cabrera Triple Crown season
Yes.
versus
Trout.
when he won that year. I mean, it's a very much a narrative driven case. I thought Raleigh was going to win it just based on that, just because that's all anyone was talking about, right? I mean, we weren't really even talking about Judge because he does it all the time, and I thought maybe there'd be some Yankees fatigue, some Judge fatigue. So I actually thought Cal Raleigh, and I think the prediction markets actually thought he was too up until the bitter end, unless I'm remembering incorrectly. But yeah, I do think Nick Kurtz, he's not an outlandish price. I want to say he's like plus 1,500 or something, which is very similar to Acuna at plus 1,000. There's not meaningful difference necessarily between the two. But good lineup, hitter friendly environment, and he could absolutely smash the ball.
And he might be the guy that gets credit if the A's are able, they're going to be a great story if they contend for the playoffs and they have an outside shot. It's like, around 20%. Um, uh, and you never really know what to make of that team now that they're in their kind of vagabond era. But he's the only one kind of on the boards. Like Brent Rooker is behind, way behind. Like I'm talking plus 12,000 odds, whereas Nick Kurtz is plus 1,500. So if he has anything near the type of pace of home run hitting season that he had, and the A's are, one of these surprise teams that finishes even like they don't maybe not even have to make the playoffs. They just have to finish like 80 some odd wins and surprise some people. And he has this great year, and you're like, whoa. And, the counter candidates are strong. If Raleigh drops off, that's one fewer that you have to kind of worry about. Bobby Witt is probably, the kind of chief counter candidate to Judge in the AL. And you could see the Royals having a really strong year, and he could kind of just take over that race. But if nobody claims it, suddenly Nick Kurtz is right in there. So, you kind of talk yourself in on that. And then I really like Fernando Tatis Jr. in the NL because, again, people are kind of disrespecting the Padres and they're forgetting that this guy is going to have a lot of war by the end of the season if healthy. And so that in and of itself, if you think about those two combinations of like the Padres exceeding expectations, probably not going to unseat the Dodgers, but we've seen that happen before. Them be very competitive with the Dodgers in that division if the Dodgers pace themselves, and then him being one of the driving forces behind that, you're going to get MVP support coming out of that.
And I would almost say in the NL particularly, you could probably bet on any non-Dodger and probably not Juan Soto and get value in the market
Yeah,
because you're paying a premium for Ohtani, right? Like you're
Ohtani.
paying a premium for any Dodger because it's already baked in there. Everyone knows they're the best. They're consensus best team in baseball. So it's very easy to say, well, yeah, he's a lock to win it in a lot of people's minds. So I would almost guarantee that there's value on any other player that's like a mid price. Once you get past Ohtani, Soto, maybe one or two other people, you probably have plus EV. That's not to say they're going to win it, but your bet is probably in the right shape
Yeah.
because, as I said, people are going to be paying a premium on Dodgers players.
Yeah, the Dodgers have become one of these kind of public teams that, and Ohtani is the most famous player in the world. So uh, in addition to the fact that he's already won 3 straight MVPs, so there's that sense that this is just his award to lose, which it is most likely, especially if he stays healthy. But then, for him to be minus 140 to win going into a season, I don't know how many times. Probably Barry Bonds at his peak. If we could go back and find those odds, I think he's the only other player to have won. Well, I say other. Otani hasn't actually done it yet, but the only player to have won 4 straight MVPs is Barry Bonds, and he also won, I think, what, 7 in his whole career. So there are probably times in which he was minus in the odds going into a season, but short of that, which was like a historic run in terms of baseball history, you'd be hard pressed to find someone be negative odds to win an MVP going into the season.
Yeah, I mean, just look at who's the favorite in the AL. Like,
Yeah,
what's
it's
the odds of
Judge. And
the favorite?
Judge is plus 185, and he has
They
this extensive history of
Which
winning
is
as well.
short. For an MVP, that's short to be plus
Yeah,
185. Typically, you see like plus 300, right? 3 to 1 odds or somewhere thereabout. So,
right.
it shows you that's a huge difference. And, like I said, the books know this, right? They don't want to be on the hook for any more money than they have to. So they're gonna definitely gonna shade it to, a worse price, which is just gonna bring up, as I said, like the mid pack of players that are right behind the Dodgers and probably Soto for the Mets.
Yeah. Any other bets on your mind that kind of stand out as we look ahead to the season? It could be another award. It could be any kind of random prop or anything like that. I don't know if that's in your notes. I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
No, yeah, I do have a bunch of stuff here. I do like Hunter Brown of the Astros. That's kind of like a dark horse Cy Young award. He's close, right? 2.43 ERA, 200 strikeouts. I mean, he's in the conversation. He does need to kick it up a notch. If he didn't, he wouldn't be plus 1,500. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at here. But again, I think you're getting a better price on him than some of the other top tier names for a similar profile, right? A guy that doesn't allow many runs, strikes out a lot of batters. That's typically how you award the Cy Young. So I think for a team like Houston, if I'm kind of digging in the crates a little bit, he's probably someone that I'm going to keep an eye on. Um,
Do you
Again,
think we're due? Like it stands out to me that we've had these kind of like multi-year runs. It feels like with a lot of these awards, not just Otani. Judge has won AL MVP 3 of the past 4 seasons. Skubal is on a multi-year run as well. Skeens, could be. He has that sort of narrative around him. What is that? Just like what is it? Just we have these great players and they're kind of performing, or is it that maybe narrative is making less of a impact on the voting, and so it's more about the numbers? And it feels like it's easier to conquer the numbers alone than it is to conquer the numbers plus the narrative in maybe an earlier era of the game when that mattered more.
I mean, I think it's way more numbers driven. I mean, just look at how much we discount pitcher wins now, right? I mean, and
Right.
it's going to get even discounted further when we start to look at some of the upcoming Hall of Fame candidates. Like, what does an Hall of Fame pitcher even look like now, right? It's not 300 wins.
No way.
It may not even be two. I mean, DeGrom could have like 150 wins when he gets in. So, I do think it's very numbers driven. I also think the books especially have become better at projecting players, or at least narrowing down their projections to a way that they can price the markets better. Because again, the the pitchers that we're talking about early in the season are generally the ones that are in the mix. I mean, when was the last time we had a dark horse winner of an award? I mean, Cal Raleigh might even had a chance.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
was
he
about what qualified.
yeah. So it's been a while, like you said. Um, but look, that's why that's why you're betting, and that's why it's also important that when you are making these bets that you're getting a price that has value, right? I mean, because you are kind of dealing with an uphill battle in terms of two-time winners, three-time winners that are also in the mix this year, and their odds are going to reflect that. So if you are going to take an outlier that or be contrarian, you absolutely have to get a decent price and also shop for the price. I bet you we can pull up 3 different sports books and the price for Hunter Brown is going to be different for all 3 for the exact same award. It could be meaningful. One person could have him at plus 1,000. Wouldn't surprise me to see plus 2,000 there. So it's also important that you shop around so that if you are going contrarian, that you're getting the best price.
Yeah, and I was thinking like, well, maybe one of the more random award winners was Rick Porcello winning the Cy Young, and I was like, when was that? Well, it was 2016, which is now a decade ago, which
Yeah.
is very disturbing to realize how long ago that was that he won Cy Young. But that's probably the type of thing. Jose Abreu in the shortened season won the MVP for the White Sox, and then just like completely fell off the planet after that. So it is rare though. Like once maybe per decade or something, do you get one of these like completely out of nowhere kind of
Because we've
dark
had
horse
like
type of.
because we've had like Pedro Martinez, right? We had the DeGroms, um, and now we have like the Scoobles of the world.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
Justin Verlander,
yeah,
so yeah, Kershaw. So you'd really have like, and it probably is more in pitching than in the MVP, which always almost always goes to a hitter, because it's just when you're the team factor, the narrative factor that we've been talking about. It feels like it doesn't really apply to the Cy Young. It's really just about performance. It's like who's the best pitcher this year. Whereas with the MVP, it's maybe decreasingly so, but it is about performance plus the story. But again, we may be in an era where that is not as true anymore because people want to, they know they're going to get ratioed if they vote for somebody who's like completely random or based on not
yeah.
on stats or the war leaderboard or
That's the
whatever.
fear, right? I mean, the fear is
Yeah.
like your vote getting out there, and we talk about performance. I think part of that with the Cy Young is the devaluation of wins, right? Like we're
Yeah.
not looking at that as success. Like 15 wins is not something that we're looking at anymore. We're looking at ERA, strikeouts, and to a lesser degree, FIP, field independent pitching. Like what would this ERA look like if everything else was equal to league average and that sort of stuff?
And that matters a lot because pitching wins. You think about how much variance there is in that. Obviously, if you pitch a ton of innings and you pitch well, it will eventually even out, especially like, over the span of multiple seasons to the best pitchers win the most games. But between run support and just stuff that can happen, that even something like ERA, like the origins of FIP and the idea behind FIP was I think Boris McCracken was wondering why Greg Maddux suddenly his ERA went up by like a run per 9 innings just randomly one year, and then it snapped back to normal the following year. And he's like, yeah, he gave up like a 330 BABIP that one year, and does he have any control over that? And it turns out not really. And that's the origin of FIP. So the more that we rely on these kind of skill based metrics rather than stuff that also has the noise around just stuff happening, that probably lends itself to a very strong incumbent effect because the most, barring injury, the most skilled pitchers and hitters in a given year are going to be the same people that were the most skilled the previous year. And the more that we kind of filter out noise around performance, the more we're going to drill down to who's just literally the best at playing baseball, independent of a lot of these external factors that you have no control over.
And also, the Cy Young doesn't have the word valuable in it, right? And I think the
No, it
word
doesn't.
valuable means different things to different people, right? Does it mean the best player on the best team? Does it mean the player with the best season? Does it mean the player who is most valuable by something like wins above replacement, a value type metric? So when you have people interpreting that word differently, it leads to different voting patterns. And I think that
Totally.
that
Yeah.
also, you with the Cy Young, you're really just focused in on performance. And at this point, like we talked about ERA and strikeouts, whereas the narrative, because of the word valuable, I think is central to the MVP awards because it's a subjective interpretation of the word valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the Cy Young plaque underneath that creepy disembodied hand holding the baseball is the words most outstanding, which I think is a lot easier to, it just leaves less room for interpretation. It's just like, okay, you want the best. And full stop on that. But I'm really interested in the awards. Like if we can get some shakeup compared with the past few years and end some of these dynasties. I guess it's a little like the World Series, right? Can we get a team other than the Dodgers to win? Can we get some pitcher other than Scooble, who by the way is very easy to root for? Love Scooble. Don't want him not to have a great season, but I also just like to see, same with Otani. My God, I mean, how could you hate Otani? But just see some different names and faces in the mix to win these awards. And I think that's what made Raleigh last year so exciting, was just like the story of this catcher hitting 60 home runs. But we'll see if that continues to happen. Um, I feel like we're kind of nearing the end of our. We had said originally we would do an hour. I think we've done an hour and a half. Really appreciate
Extra
everybody. I think
innings.
we've got. What's that?
Extra innings.
Yeah, we're into extra innings here. I mean, appreciate everybody. We've got more viewers now than we had at the beginning. So, if people want to continue hearing us talk, we might be able to go a little bit longer. We're in the fourth inning of this game. I don't think we're going to go through all 9 innings of it, but I will say that after that, this has been a weird game. Like the way that it's kind of started out with like the Pirates scored early, got to Peralta, you think, same old Mets, Pirates are on the rise. Then Skeens does the unthinkable and gets pulled after just 37 pitches. And so then now we're kind of back in this like Brandon Lau home run fest. Peralta still on the hill. He's thrown 54 pitches here in the fourth inning. And he might be the key to everything for the Mets, really, honestly, if you think about it. Like, they so lacked pitching, just reliable pitching last year. I think they were out mid 20s in WAR from the rotation at the end of the year last year, despite all the money that they spent. And in some ways, they spent more on the lineup than the rotation, and they got what they paid for on some level. But I do think that being able to have a reliable starter, but Peralta is going to find out really soon what happens when you go from being arguably one of the most underrated pitchers that people don't talk about and consider enough when they're thinking about it. It's just the Brewers, as we were talking about earlier, to now it's like a lot of pressure to be the guy for the Mets opening day starter on this super expensive $300 million team. And we'll see if he can kind of play to that role. What do you think about the whole there's always that debate about whether players can go from being in a comparatively smaller market to a city like New York and be able to perform, and whether that's even like a real thing. How much is that a tax on performance? For some players, does it improve their performance? Are we over indexing these narratives because the New York media wants to feel like they're the center of the world? What are your thoughts on all of that?
I think there's a very real difference, and I'll bring it to my own personal experience. When I was just writing for myself, and people commented, like it was whatever. But then when I started with the post, and I was writing stuff, and people commented, it was like a fire hose was turned on. Like, I was just getting stuff from all angles, and it's an adjustment. I mean, it's one thing to have a thick skin when you got one or two people calling you an idiot or something, but when you have, like, your inbox is just full with stuff, it's a lot different. You're under a microscope, right? You have a much bigger presence, and you have you go from a small fish, small pond to a bigger pond, and there's just a lot more happening. So, some people might be able to mitigate it more than others, but there has to be a learning curve, right? I mean, you don't wanna be at the butt end of a joke or a pun on the back of the New York Post sports section, right? Like, if you did something, that was wrong. I mean, and now, I mean, think about it. Like, it's so easy to lob a complaint at a player, right? I mean, like, it's easier
Yeah.
now than it's ever been, and it just gets magnified, and people pile on, and so I definitely think there's something to that. If but again, you get paid a lot of money to weather that storm and go out and perform, and you have to do that. So, but yeah, I it's gotta be a transition. I it just because it's so fast, right? When you think about it, like, everyone's behind you, everything's great, they're happy you're here, you go in to pitch a clunker, and literally, like, the second you log on to any sort of device
Oh
on
my God.
Wi-Fi, like, you are just bombarded, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's gotta be tough.
Totally. And I think some personality types probably are more suited to it. Like, that's why I liked Juan Soto. He's played for both New York teams. He feels to me like the type of guy that's just like wired to play in New York. Like, just the cockiness and the attitude that he brings and all of that. Now, he didn't have the greatest season, the vintage Juan Soto season that first year with the Mets, but he had a better season with the Yankees the year before. And, I just have no reason to doubt his ability. But he always just seemed to me to be someone that was like extraordinarily psychologically suited to play in New York. But there are other players. I don't know if Freddie Peralta is one of them or not. We'll see. He seems to be, calming down after that shaky initial inning or so to this game. But some players, yeah, if they're coming, like Brian McCann was someone that I seem to remember when he joined the Yankees. He played for Atlanta, famously a little more laid back environment. Great player for them, and then he goes to the Yankees and doesn't have the great first year with them, and just it seems like it's this huge culture shock for him in a way that he wasn't necessarily really prepared for. But it does feel like also sometimes these guys can have a rocky start with the big name franchise and then redeem themselves a little bit further on. I think of JD Drew in Boston as an example of that. I don't think he ever truly, was considered like the heir to Trot Nixon and those guys in the Boston outfield, but he did have that grand slam in the ALCS against Cleveland that I think got people back on his side after he had such a kind of shaky, mediocre year with the Red Sox to start off that big contract. And the contracts are probably as big of a part of it as the market size of the city, or they're correlated, of course.
Francisco Lindor, I mean, he got off to a
Yeah,
shaky start in New York, and now, you talk bad about him now, Mets fans will pound you into the ground, right? I mean, I
yeah.
think about, um, Max Scherzer during his time in New York. Like, that's a guy too that I think is perfectly suited. And I also think just his mentality of, if you want to take me off the mound, you're literally gonna have to drag me off this mound because I'm not
Quite
going in.
literally.
Right, quite literally, yeah. I mean, and like, that's the type of player New Yorkers would embrace, right? Any team would embrace that, right? I mean, like, they loved him in Washington for that. So I do think that there's certainly some, and like you said, the redemption factor is also just as quick, right? You could be a goat 1 minute, but you do something great, and you're gonna be loved forever. I mean, gosh, I saw that with like Darryl Strawberry growing up. I mean, just absolutely sing-songing him, Darryl, like when he was, doing knucklehead stuff, but then he hits a moonshot and it's like, prodigal son has come home. I mean, that's the way New York is. That's the way a lot of these big market is, like you said, with Boston too. Um, I think it's because the fandom is intense, right? I mean, and like you said, the more money, more intense pressure. But they're just as quick, I think, to forgive in most cases. And then, you're right back on it. So
Yeah, and I think baseball, because of its, as we see Juan Soto at the plate, because it's this everyday rhythm, and for a lot of fans, the way you consume it is. I just have it on in the background constantly. Like, it's not necessarily always going to be the focus of attention. Certainly, even, cards on the table tonight. I mean, there's, March Madness games happening that have more stakes in the moment than baseball. So it'll get like a tiny little window in my laptop or whatever. But it because of the rhythm of every day, you're seeing the same guys out there, especially position players. It does become, they're your friends, they're your family. You kind of get to know them. You become accustomed to seeing them, and I think that plays itself into this relationship. It's a very parasocial relationship, but it is this relationship that you have with the players on your team. And baseball, as we were saying earlier, it might be trying to make a transition to become a more national sport. But at its core, it's a regional, local sport. And you've got your local team and you watch every game or listen to every game. When I was in New York, I would listen to Howie Rose on the radio every day. And you just get to, through the rhythm of that, you get to know the players on what feels like a personal level. Obviously, it's not actually a personal level, but it is really kind of lending itself to that. And so, that is very different, I think, than other sports. Your relationship to other players in other sports, whether, in football, they're wearing helmets. You see them once a week. A lot of times you might engage with them as like a fantasy player, not even necessarily as a player for your particular team. And so it's just harder to have these like relationship type of feelings toward a player as opposed to baseball, where you see their faces and you kind of, you're with them through the ups and downs every day through the season for 162 games, hopefully more, but at least 162 games.
yeah, and I also think the games are more accessible, right? For football, you have once a week, and the tickets are expensive,
Yeah.
And, here in Washington, the the game day experience is horrendous in terms of, like, getting there and public transportation and everything like that. But like you said, I think you hit on it, like, with the helmets. You look at basketball and you look at baseball, like, those are the 2 easiest sports to connect with players because, like you said, you see their faces. You can recognize them out on the street. It's hard to recognize football players unless they're like Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, like you're not recognizing your nose tackle because you know almost never see him without his helmet.
I mean, you'd
Same
see like a really large human and be like,
right,
"I bet he plays for
right,
someone."
yeah. But also hockey's the same way, right? I mean, hockey now has helmets and the visors and everything, and unless you're someone like Crosby or Ovechkin, that's the NHL's marketing. I mean, it's difficult to. I can't tell you how many times I've been to Caps practice. I have had Caps players in the elevator with me and also normal people, and no one says a word to them. Like, back when Backstrom, like, first started playing, like, he was in the elevator at the practice facility all the time and was able to come and go as he pleased and just was never, like, swarmed or anything. That's just the connection just wasn't as deep in the beginning. Obviously, it became deeper over time, but with baseball and basketball, like you said, I mean, it's much easier to make that connection.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, the hockey players are also very kind of like personally, they seem to be more kind of deferential. Maybe it's the Canadianness to it, but they don't seem to be as much of a presence as a general rule as some of the other sports players. So maybe that also plays into it. Where like if somebody isn't just sort of occupying a lot of the attention whenever they walk into a room, whether through like size, physical attributes, or just like sheer force of personality, they might go unnoticed and they could be a professional athlete. They could be one of the best in the world, and you wouldn't even know they were there.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting though. They're also happy to be there is not the right word, but there are a lot of hockey players that are just happy to be on the ice, right, with the team, getting their stuff going. Um, the diva ratio in hockey, I think, is a lot
Yes.
lower than some of the other sports that we see for sure.
Yeah, but we love divas too. I
Yes.
think it takes a mix of all different ones, and that's kind of a problem. I mean, maybe one of the things that we could talk about before we close up is just the general state of baseball. Where obviously you've got Otani, who is like the star of stars now, and that has worked out really well for baseball to get him. It land him with the Dodgers. He was already in LA, but the less desirable LA. Now he's with the flagship team, and he's winning these World Series, and that's just seems to be kind of there's momentum behind baseball in a way that people are now talking about it like, hey, Ethan Strauss had a story about at least debating whether it has surpassed the NBA, kind of resurpassed, I guess, as the second sport. Nothing is going to touch football in America, but it does feel to me like baseball has this momentum that would have been difficult to imagine like 10, 15 years ago, where there was this constant hand wringing about, is baseball dead? Look at this random NFL Thursday night game that outdrew game 7 of the World Series. Baseball is in trouble. No one knows who Mike Trout is, and all these things. And now it feels like maybe the vibes around baseball have gone in a more positive direction, which of course could be ruined by a lockout or strike or whatever. But do I have that read correct about sort of this, like, whether it's the NBA being descendant or the MLB being ascendant, but it does feel like baseball is having a little bit more of a moment than it had maybe 15 years ago.
Well, I think the Mike Trout thing was real, and I think that was also a real problem that their best player was largely unknown. Now, part of that was, he played for the Angels, who aren't very good. He played on the West Coast. A lot of people are sleeping. But you look at the seasons he was having, especially early on,
Unbelievable.
and how baseball didn't galvanize around that in some way is perplexing to me. But yeah, I mean, I think we are see. I think part of the basketball stuff is that the Warriors and are kind of declined. They're not there's I think people like the inevitability of basketball to some degree, knowing that, LeBron or the Warriors were gonna win. Maybe they didn't have to invest as much time in the regular season, but they're still able to kind of be a touchstone. And, you had people like LeBron James that was, certainly marketed very well by the NBA. But I also think baseball now is a much better watchable product, right? We're not watching 3-hour games anymore. We're not,
Yeah.
the games are much quicker paced. Extra innings has the added wrinkle of the man on second base, and like
Which
you know,
I don't love. I don't know what
I
your
don't
take
love
is
it
on
either.
that.
But it, when
You
you
can see
look at
why they did it.
right, and basketball, one of the reasons why it's so much fun is back and forth, right? I mean, there's like a lot of scoring. There's a lot of things that are happening. Baseball doesn't have a lot of things that are happening at a fast pace. So speeding up the game, having the extra innings wrinkle, I definitely think that that's helped the game. And then along comes Otani, who does things we haven't seen since Babe Ruth and better than Babe Ruth. Certainly helps it. And they were able to market him. We used to talk about, Michael Jordan becoming the logo of the NBA. MLB should make Otani the logo of MLB, right? I mean, like, because I
Would you
think
have
we're
him
going to,
holding a bat with one
yeah,
hand and then
and a pit
throwing
and
with another,
yeah,
pitching with the other?
yeah, um, with all his trophies. Yeah, but I think that they have I mean, the marketing dollars that he gets is just absolutely unreal. And the Dodgers justified their spending on Otani because of the marketing and the eyeballs that he brings in. So yeah, I think that it's definitely on the upswing. Um, I don't know if they're appealing to a younger audience as much. Like, I don't know of a lot of kids that are baseball fans. Perhaps like you and I were baseball. Like, when I grew up, baseball was huge in my neighborhood, and also tennis because John McEnroe lived like 10 minutes away. Um, but, like, the Knicks weren't really a big thing. I mean, the Giants were the Giants, but they weren't really a big thing. Mets, Yankees, like, that was, Ricky Henderson stealing bases, like, that was, like, the big time highlight reels that I remember. But I do think that we're starting to get, I think the repeatability of these, awards also help. People know who Skeens is. They probably know who Scooble is a little bit more. They were perhaps even invested in the Cal Raleigh situation last year because everybody was talking about Cal Raleigh, even outside of his home market. So I do think that there's, baseball starting to do the right things just in time for a lockout, right? Like, just in time for the gears to come to a screeching halt.
And that's why I really hope that kind of cooler heads prevail because and I point to the WNBA as an example of like it was very contentious. At times it seemed like there would not be a season this year, which would have been a horrible shame based on the just incredible momentum that they've had recently. But it felt like they were pushing themselves to the brink of ruining that. And then eventually these negotiations yielded something where it seems like both sides are happy, they can live with it, and they can move forward and kind of build the momentum together going forward. I'm hopeful that that can happen in baseball. I don't know how Tony Clark, that whole situation with the players union is its own like craziness happening. But there's been so much brinksmanship, even over like COVID. There were things where it could have been like easy wins, like, hey, you guys have a chance to be the only sport or one of the only sports that's kind of happening in the country. If you could just get your act together to be able to come to an agreement, and they really could only kind of get the bare minimum number of games in that season. But it's just been so acrimonious for years, and it does feel like they're poking the owners are poking the bear by trying to push through this salary cap that they know that the players have never had any kind of, it's just a non-starter for them. So we'll see. I will say also a cursory, I did not do my homework on the ratings trends going into this because I didn't know we would talk about it, but a cursory Google search did show that the 18 to 34 demographic saw a 69% increase in viewership if you count all the different platforms, which I think is probably also a big part of it. I love that you pointed out the rule changes because that I think is drives everything. And the combination of that and Otani coming along at the same time was just like they had no way of predicting that that would be sort of the confluence of events. But it is a great example of a league, being proactive, recognizing problems, making rules-based changes that encourages a more watchable product. And then also this transition, the tightrope that we've been talking about this whole time of them trying to make their way from the regional sports network model, which is fundamentally a very kind of like for lack of a better term, boomer type of coded model where, who has cable, who is going to be watching these games on through that medium, especially if you lock everybody out of being able to watch it elsewise. It's older audiences. And so being able to put it on a Netflix, do more of the streaming route might be their way to kind of improve that even more among the younger audiences. And that might be reason to think. I always thought that if you just put baseball on, you've got, like we were talking about when we were younger, stars like Ken Griffey Jr., put them in front of kids, you will make baseball fans. And to kind of get away from that in the name of short-term money, for sure. I mean, the regional sports networks were absolute gold mines for these teams for so many years, but it eventually, you starve out the younger generation because they don't have access to watch that for the most part, unless their parents subscribe. And you're going to end up not having a generation of baseball fans that would have otherwise been fans. And so maybe now they can kind of make a push. And even something like the World Baseball Classic, which we just concluded, I think, was it last week? Time is flying. Everything is running together with that, March Madness and all that. But in the past month, we concluded the World Baseball Classic. And when that first came out, a lot of people were kind of poo-pooing it. And they were like, why do we need this? This is dumb. It's, whatever. But now I think it's become not only this institution, as you would expect when there's been more editions of it, but also, Otani in Japan winning in that head to head with Trout in 2023. That was like such an iconic moment that propelled a lot of the Otani. It's been just sort of like continuous Otani ever since then. And it was, again, this perfect storm of timing where he, goes on this historic run of seasons, and that is part of that narrative. But now you've got like so many other people around the world, the other countries, even the U.S. is trying to be more excited about the WBC, and it's certainly sent more of its best players this time. That it is creating this kind of global reach for the game that maybe wasn't there as much in the past, or was not connected as much to MLB specifically in a way that it was in the past. So all those things seem like they're building positive momentum for the game as we kind of look ahead to this 26th season.
Yeah, and I remember, back in the 90s being able to watch to watch the Atlanta Brave games because they were on TBS, right? So,
Yeah,
like,
or
that
the
was the
Cubs.
only or the Cubs, right? So those are the only teams that really got, exposed to outside of your own home market if you had cable. Um, and I think that, in addition to how well they performed, I think that that helped kinda popularize them for sure because you were able to see them regularly, connect with them. So I think that the baseball's gotta figure out a way to make the games accessible, right? Make the games, also competitive and compelling and, really highlight the stars, highlight the up and coming stars, highlight the stars again, right? I mean, think about you have Otani as the anchor now, right? You have Aaron Judge, you have Juan Soto, you have these big names that
And they're
people
in
know,
big markets.
and they're huge markets. This is your chance to bring in the other markets. If you truly want to have, the salary cap, the floor, team spending, having money to spend, like you have to leverage that. And, a work stoppage of any type is gonna pump the brakes because, it's very difficult to get the momentum back. And I think also other sports are better now at like capturing that. Like everyone's fighting for every square inch of eyeball on the screen, on the second screen, on the third screen. And I think if baseball has any sort of pause, I think the other pro sports clubs, including women's sports, are going to do whatever they can. XFL types, like, are going to do whatever they can to grab hold of that, viewing market share. And who knows if you get it back, right? I mean, like it depends on how much of the product they're exposed to and how much they enjoy it. It could put a real dent in any of the upswing that baseball's had.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. I think that's probably a good note to end things on with the live stream today, since we're coming up on 2 hours. We did double, but it didn't feel like it. It's just so, I really appreciated being able to talk to you. We've known each other for a little while, and we've been the two parallel Neils. But it's really exciting to have you on Substack. And just look forward to what you're writing there. And your Substack is fancy stats.
Fancy stats, yeah, that was a pejorative term someone used for my stuff, and I just kinda leaned into it. Um, but in all seriousness, I might not be here if not for reading your stuff back on, like, Sports Reference blog that you used
Wow.
to do. I've been a fan for a long time, well over a decade. I mean, I've digested every single thing that you've written. I truly think that you're one of the best. I appreciate you having me on here, and it's in all seriousness, like, you are someone that I look up to quite a bit, and I think that you are absolutely super talented, and I appreciate everything that you write.
Well, the feeling is mutual, and we gotta do more Neil casts,
Let's do it.
through the
Yeah.
season. It seems like we've got a lot of viewers, even 2 hours strong into this. We love it. I see Doug Glanville. Speaking of the Cubs in the '90s, watching on WGN, one of my favorite players, always love to have, to share Substack with him as well. But just to all the people that are watching, really appreciate you guys, and, we'll let you know next time we do this. And yeah, we got to make it a regular thing now since it seems like it was a rousing success. And I hope that this season is a rousing success as well. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the games today, and just like it's so great to have baseball back. Like, I think non-baseball fans truly do not understand just like the void when there is no baseball, and it feels like it's like spiritual. Like, it sounds
And the
weird to
countdown
say.
starts right at the last pitch of the World Series, right?
Totally.
Someone will post pitches and catchers will report in X days or, something like that. I mean, it's definitely, on the calendar immediately.
Yeah, and so love to have it back. Love to have me have an excuse to update these stats every morning. If you want to check out, I keep my Jeff Bagwell, which is my pride and joy, the combination of Fangraphs and Baseball Reference WAR, which has a extremely convoluted. I mean, actually, no, it was a total coincidence that it spells out Jeff Bagwell. It was not backronymed or reverse
Serendipity.
engineered at all. Yeah, serendipitous that it was that way. But I'm going to have those up as soon as the various different war purveyors put those stats out. We've got the ELO ratings, like you mentioned earlier. Going to update those every day through the season. You can download that data. I have like a subscriber area that you can get to if you want to have that. Plus, if you do for any of the sports individually, you get access to all the data for all the sports that I keep. I've got this on hockey, basketball, college basketball, all that stuff. So check that out. And yeah, I think for both of the Neils, this is we're us wishing you a really happy opening day, and enjoy the rest of the games, everyone.
Thank you all for joining and hanging out with us.
Bye.